10 Best TV Westerns If You Love Tombstone. Although Western films like Tombstone may not be in fashion anymore, there's still plenty of love for the genre on the small screen. Some of the most iconic Westerns have come in the form of serialized dramas, taking everything that was so innovative about Hollywood movies and transferring it to sweeping, long-running narratives that audiences can tune into week after week. The best ever Westerns are those that use the stylish flair of this genre and blend it with a rich, important story that audiences can relate to, and modern Westerns have essentially mastered this craft. Television Westerns are generally much larger in scale than their cinematic counterparts like Tombstone, with more ensemble casts and narratives that branch off in countless different directions. This creates endless possibilities for the projects and likely explains why they have become so popular in recent years. The Western is an inherently complicated and sprawling genre, so it fits perfectly with this format. The best TV show Westerns take advantage of episodic storytelling to craft rich, powerful stories that carry on for many seasons. Longmire was among the first hugely successful TV Westerns of the 2010s, kickstarting the boost in popularity that the genre saw over that decade. The story follows a retired sheriff named Walt Longmire who returns to work after his wife's death, investigating the town's most serious crimes and developing a reputation as a formidable lawman. The show adopted a familiar episodic format, with new criminals and mysteries happening each week, though Longmire's greatest strength was its ability to weave these together with the overarching character arcs. Longmire boasted some great cinematography and extremely sharp writing, which kept every episode feeling new and interesting. The side characters were a clear standout of this show, with Robert Taylor's lead performance graciously leaving room for some exciting one-off villains or fun anti-heroes. Longmire ran for 6 great seasons before coming to a coordinated end in 2017. Godless is one of the shortest-running Westerns in recent memory, but it managed to pack everything it needed into one season for plenty of tight, sharp storytelling that represented the best of the Western genre. The story centers around Jeff Daniels' notorious criminal Frank Griffin, who's seeking revenge on his old friend for betraying his group of outlaw brothers. The criminal's outpost in a small town in the American West, where the residents quickly take issue with the lawlessness of their actions. Despite such a short runtime in comparison to some other TV Westerns, Godless is one of the most exciting and well-written shows of the past few years. Each episode boasts some slow, methodical storytelling that manages to enhance the atmosphere of the show while progressing the narrative at the same time, which is a recipe for success in limited series like these. Hell on Wheels is another long-running Western that follows a familiar story of revenge and violence, but it does so in a way that feels pointed and unpredictable from start to finish. It follows an ex-soldier named Cullen Bohannon, who embarks on a mission to make his enemies pay for the brutal murder of his wife. It's a simple story of vengeance and bloodshed, but the character work is the real star of the show with Hell on Wheels. Hell on Wheels features a brilliant cast of interesting, complex characters whose intentions and motivations are always kept somewhat secret from the audience. This creates such an engaging and gripping viewing experience, telling the story from Bohannon's perspective and only revealing the information that he'd be privy to. There are plenty of secrets and complex plots that keep the twists coming, and it's never predictable or boring. Wynonna Earp offers a fascinating twist on the Western, blending the typical tropes of the genre with a more modern, horror-inspired twist. The show follows the titular demon hunter as she fights against the vengeful souls of convicted criminals who are wreaking havoc in the town of Purgatory, where they struggle to find eternal rest. Wynonna Earp is unlike any other Western, using this classic genre as a backdrop to explore some inventive storytelling, fantasy concepts, and formal horror elements. The Western features of Wynonna Earp are mostly aesthetic, as the show subverts the expectations of the genre but pays homage to it in a way that always feels respectful and authentic. The show was an enormous success, paving the way for several other twists on the Western genre to come in the future. Wynonna Earp was even revived for a movie, which helped answer some of the burning questions left over from the finale. Yellowstone is undeniably the most successful neo-Western show to come out of the past few years. The show follows the Dutton family, the owners of the largest ranch in America, who must fend off land encroachers and protect their property, all while settling their internal disputes in the process. It's a much more modern and inventive twist on the Western, with less gratuitous violence and much more methodical, well-plotted storytelling. Yellowstone also has several spin-off properties that have essentially banked the show's popularity for many years to come, setting a precedent as one of the first Western franchises on television. And it's easy to see why Yellowstone has managed to achieve so much success. It takes a very simple concept and elevates it with amazing performances, gorgeous visuals, and razor-sharp writing that makes even the simplest of situations feel like the end of the world. There's magic in Yellowstone, and it's the kind of project that supersedes the constraints of its genre. Justified tells the story of a U.S. Marshal named Raylan Givens, who enforces his own personal justice on the criminals of a small town and ensures that those in need aren't tormented by the outlaws roaming the country. Like most great Western movies, Justified works because of its complex protagonist and rich backstory. Raylan is a fascinating character with multiple dimensions, and his journey across the show's 5 seasons is consistently fun to watch. The show also has some great one-off subplots and recurring characters who ensure that the story reaches beyond Raylan's own personal journey, which is crucial for a show that runs as long as Justified did. It's an excellent example of how to adapt a classic Western formula for the small screen, taking the tropes and conventions that made Westerns popular in the first place and transforming them into bite-sized pieces week by week. Little House on the Prairie is one of the first shows that's always brought up when discussing TV Westerns, and for good reason. The show essentially paved the way for the existence of Westerns on television, where they'd previously been confined to cinema. Running for 9 seasons, the series followed the lives of one rural family living on a farm in Walnut Grove in Minnesota. It was much more lighthearted and less macho than most Westerns that preceded it, but it stuck closely to the conventions of the genre. Little House on the Prairie knew how to make the audience cry, how to make them laugh, and most importantly, how to get them invested in the lives of these few characters. The long-running nature of the show meant that audiences could really connect to this family, and it importantly proved that you don't need bloody violence or complex tales of revenge to make a Western work. Gunsmoke was among the very first TV Westerns, and while it wasn't as innovative and game-changing as those that followed, it was a near-perfect example of how to make the most out of the genre. It told the story of a U.S. Marshal posted in a remote town in the Wild West, following his attempts to clean up the streets and fight off the outlaws that threatened his job. Interestingly, Gunsmoke broke the mold slightly by weaving some romance into its long-running narrative of crime. When he wasn't fighting crime, Marshal Dillon spent most of his time trying to win over the love of a woman, giving Gunsmoke a much-needed rest from the high-octane genre storytelling. This was likely a huge contributor to the show's immense success, even though Gunsmoke was sadly canceled in 1975 and never given a real finale. Deadwood was released at a time when Westerns were arguably at their lowest popularity, but the show managed to subvert expectations enough to make a name for itself regardless. The HBO drama took all the aesthetic features that made Westerns so interesting and applied them to a straightforward crime drama, following an ensemble cast in Deadwood, South Dakota, where the law has no reach. Deadwood was an interesting project that managed to finally get audiences back on the side of the Western, proving that it doesn't always have to be as corny and formulaic as many of the spaghetti Westerns that we're used to. Deadwood also had many characters based on real-life figures, which made the show just as educational as it was entertaining. Walker may not be the best-reviewed Western out there, but it's certainly one of the most interesting. The show follows a widowed father who returns to Austin in an attempt to reconnect with his family and settle down for good. However, he's haunted by his wife's death and begins to grow suspicious of the people around him. It's a fascinating deconstruction of the genre, using the tropes of the Western to examine its purpose in the modern day. Walker's strongest asset is the ensemble cast and their respective performances, with Jared Padalecki shining in the lead role. The supporting characters also have their moments in the spotlight, with actors such as Molly Hagan, Keegan Allen, and Cale Cully all turning in excellent work that helps elevate the family drama of this story. Walker might not have the violence of organized crime that's typically associated with the genre, but it's a much more personal story that proves Westerns don't have to be filled with revenge and cowboys like Tombstone to make an impact.